Bella. Thanks so much for choosing to do a reading with me, and thanks for choosing Zephyr Astrology. So, today we're going to be going over your solar return chart, and I would have had this done yesterday. I'm sorry. I ended up having the right location, but it would have made a major difference if I didn't have the right location. So, yes, I feel pretty good now and confident going into this. So, what we're going to do, as discussed in a previous email, is I'm going to take a brief look at your natal chart, just because for solar returns, it's good to see what energy you're coming from and then what energy you're going to. However, you are getting pretty close to your upcoming solar return. So, as early as January, the energy is going to start changing towards, it's going to start blending from the two different years. So it is pretty important to start getting a good idea of what energy we're in currently for this year and what we're going into. So I'll spend a very, very brief amount of time on the 2020 solar return, and then we'll mainly focus on the 2021. So it should take about an hour to do everything. So definitely grab a snack or get comfortable, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. Okay, Bella. So here is your natal chart to start. So, as you can see here, we've got your name, February 6th, 1984, 3:43 p.m., Brooklyn, New York, and Kings County is the 40 North 38. It was saying 42 something for the other locations of Brooklyn, and that was a very big difference because you have your ascendant at an anaretic degree, which is called a critical degree in the modern term. So that was extremely, extremely important for me to know because it could have put your rising in Leo, or it could have changed some of this house outlays that overlays that you see here. So I wanted to be sure that I had the right time. Um, so we'll go into this a little bit first. And this is good, just going to be going over your basic energy so that I know how it's shifting. So, and I know you're a beginner, so if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me in a follow-up email. Like, I have no problem following up. So one thing I'm looking for, I always go to this little graph first. So this is this is what we would call like a modality and elemental table. So this is telling me how the energy in your chart is being distributed. So this way I can see certain things, like, for instance, you have a high amount of cardinal energy. And as you know, the three modalities are cardinal, fixed, and mutable, which are split between the 12 signs. So you have a lot of cardinal energy, which tells me you're really good at starting things and you're really good at being an initiator. And sometimes cardinal people like to work alone. Like, sometimes cardinal people can be have a little bit of a lone wolf syndrome. And so there's a certain amount of energy where basically you have a lot of energy out the gate, and then because you have low mutable, is that you tend to fizzle out at the end of a project or a situation. So your sun being here in the seventh is good because you need to bring in people to kind of support you, because once you start getting towards the end of something, you tend to have more of a difficult time, or it's likely you tend to have more of a difficult time. And having a lot of fixed energy is good too, which means you can stay the course. So when you commit to something, chances are you're going to stick with that commitment. um and this all becomes important when we're talking about soul return charts. So this natal energy you have is always going to be your essential natal energy. It's not necessarily going to change, but it's almost like the energies and how they work with the solar return are going to augment your natal energy. So yeah, having a low amount of mutable means, like, maybe you have problems adapting to things, maybe you're not super versatile. But having a low amount of mutable does sort of imply this more initiation, more motivation, because mutable signs, motivation is futile for them. Like, they work in the shortest amount of bursts. So mutables have a hard time clinging on to things. They very much will just want to move to the next thing, um, and sort of be done with it. So, and as um, an aside, for Mercury, for example, Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. And so Mercury, what was Mercury known for? Being really fast. So that's the preference that they prefer to have with the mutable energy. So I know going into this that if one of your solar turns, which it shouldn't because we have a lot of planets in cardinal right now with the big stellium that's been happening, but if we were to have a solar turn with a lot of mutable energy, then I would, be able to say, oh, wow, okay, this is going to feel more comfortable this year. So, looking at the elemental energy, you have a lot of earth and you also have a lot of water because it says 3 here, but your ascendant right here is also 1 point. So, you're equal parts earth and water. So, you probably are very feminine. You're probably traditionally, a cisgender female. I mean, that's not always the case, but more often than not, that is typical. And you have some fire, but you have a very low amount of air. But your sun is in the air, and you have north node in air. So this is very interesting. Okay, so this is already telling me that one of your two of your points of mastery are both in air signs, and one is an immutable sign, which you had low mutable too. So it's interesting how this works out because sometimes people can have a void in their chart, but it's truly because in this lifetime they don't need to work on it. But for you, a goal is working on the mutable and working on the air. So learning to be more, again, versatile, more adaptable, but learning to be more objective, learning to be more tolerant of the ideas of others, which again, that sounds like it's I'm saying you're closed minded, which that's not at all what I'm saying. But with air people, it's different than water people. Like water people can be open and receptive to the ideas of others if it comes from a place of mutual feeling or a feeling that the water person can empathize with. But with air, we're dealing more with like pure objectivity and removing subjectivity and being more rational and being more methodical. Now, you do have a lot of Capricorn, which a lot of people, um, in the mid to late 80s have a lot of Capricorn. But you do have personal planets here. So, like, you will definitely be tolerant and listen to the ideas of others, but chances are you've gotten to a point where you have enough experience and have collected enough data to where like you usually know when you're right. So, which is totally fine. Um, so yeah, the low amount of air and the low amount of fire, that's something I want to look for as well. Looking at I'll just take a quick look at the luminaries. So your moon natally gets a trine from Uranus. So your moon's a little different than what is typical. Your moon was also very close to the Earth in declination right around that time too. Um, is conjunct the midheaven, and then we've got square to Venus and square to Jupiter. So even though your moon is getting squared by the benefics are still helpful. So it'll be interesting if the moon for the with the solar return laid over it, if it's getting brutalized by some other planets, because if that's the case, which it should be for, well, it would be by progression for this solar return. By the time it's your birthday, you won't have Mars on your moon. Um, but yes, so I look for certain things like that. The sun and moon, like what are they getting hit by natally, and then what could they possibly be getting hit by um, in the solar return. So your sun gets a little bit of a beating too from Saturn and Mars, both in Scorpio, um, in the fourth house, going to the seventh. Okay, so these are all things that I just need to know just to kind of get a good idea. And then obviously Chiron, your eternal wound, is at 27 Taurus, so I also need to look out if anything hits that. Okay, great. So that is kind of going over the natal. Let's go ahead and we'll go to solar turn for 2020. And sorry to double check. You said, okay, you're in the same location for both. Cool. And honestly, if you're not, it's not a big deal. I could use the birth location. So, all right. So here's the current solar return. So you were born at 3:43 p.m. and as you know, a solar return is just when the sun hits the degree and minute of your birthday. So it can happen on different days. It can happen the day before, the day after, or it can just happen at a different time on the same day. So 9:28:17 a.m. on February 6th of this year was when the solar return happens, its exact moment. So this solar return year was probably a little more comfortable, wasn't terribly uncomfortable, still low air, low fire. You still have 2 points fire because you traded a fire ascendant from your water ascendant. Um, and then what happened though is that you've had a low amount of fixed energy. So you could be fine. You were probably this year fine with starting things as usual. And you were actually placed into roles or areas where you had to be more adaptable. You had to think a little quicker on your feet. You had to go with the flow a little bit more, like Sagittarius, Pisces type of energy. And these situations, when they arise, probably felt pretty uncomfortable. So I definitely can empathize with how that would feel. It probably didn't feel great because Pisces energy, if you're not used to it, it can be very discomforting. So, and a lot of those planets were falling between your your eighth and your ninth house. So this was probably a pretty introspective year too, because all of these planets are here in the 12th. So you might have felt you need a lot of time to recharge. And you were deriving a lot of pleasure and a lot of spiritual alignment from having some of that private time. I wouldn't be surprised if this year was also a year where you started getting really into astrology. The sun at 17 degrees in the 11th, this is a very strong indicator of like astrological interest. So I wouldn't be surprised if your astrological interest did build this year. Um, and let's see. So you natally have Sun in Aquarius, Moon in Aries, and they are this is a little wide, but they are sextile. And I'm not sure why. I guess I might have small orbs on, but a very wide orb. They are definitely sextile, which is nice. I'm jealous. I have squared moon and sun, and I hate it. But for this year, your moon was in Cancer. Okay, so we had an in conjunction. So for this year, your goals, where you wanted to go, and your overall ego, and where you wanted to focus that was totally um in a way discombobulated from your moon's needs. And in fact, your moon's needs were really just like pulling you away from all this stuff you wanted to do. It could have just felt like so many things were calling your attention that it felt hard to just take a moment, you know? And again, that spiritual alignment and that sort of self-care was a way to kind of help soothe that moon a little bit. But the moon in the fourth in a solar return definitely speaks to, a lot of changes in the home as well. But let me go ahead and look here. I forgot to look at the declination natally for you. The reason I look at this is because there is something called a planet going out of bounds. So when a planet goes out of bounds, that means that it is harder to control. It's harder to predict or foresee the energies as they come. So it's kind of like a retrograde, but not quite. But you don't have anything. Jupiter is very close to going out of declination, but it's not. So that would be the only thing is like, it could be hard for you to be optimistic. It kind of just comes when it does. It could be hard for you to see the silver lining in things sometimes. But again, that Jupiter is not out of declination technically. However, here in the solar return, the Jupiter is out of declination, and the moon almost is, not quite. Yeah, so Mars almost is as well, but also not quite. Oh, I'm sorry, the Jupiter says 22. I thought that said 23, 35. Okay, so let me go through this and dissect the big three for this year. And this is normally how I do these solar return readings, but My mutable energy, I never know. I actually do all these readings cold. Like I don't even, I hardly look at the chart before I do it because I find that a little bit of intuitive process is good. So natally, you do have a analytic degree rising in Cancer. So, your typical disposition, you like to put off a very nurturing nature. You can sometimes be quite shy at first and very closed off. A lot of people with Cancer rising like to like cross their arms over themselves. Like they just, again, if you think of like the crustacean, like they like to find their own shell. So some people wear like really baggy like layers. Some people like wrap their arms around themselves. Some people divert and have a hard time making eye contact, but generally you're very warm, very receptive to other people, very calming and peaceful person to be around. And part of the reason that Cancer rising people can sometimes come off shy at first is because they have the tendency to attach to people very quickly. So they almost guard themselves a little bit because they know that once they make that attachment, they want at least for that person to have some mutual interest in that. So yes, definitely cancer risings are very sensitive as well. They can be naturally psychic. So with the 29 degrees, that is definitely a possibility. Um, the moon, I would say some of your psychic ability may be almost like a deja vu type of thing. But I'm looking at some of these other. Yeah, I mean, it's not like a super duper strong psychic, you know, overlay I'm getting here, like aspects, but the rising alone could give you a lot of that gift, but you've had to build upon it, right? It's not something that has been easy for you. That's part of the reason the 29 degrees was really important, is because when you have an anaretic degree for a planet or an angle in your chart, what this is essentially saying is this is super duper important, and this is always going to be the red flag of the chart that you have to refer back to, you have to continually work on. The ascendant we build in season and really give depth to over time. It's very similar to the sun. The moon is like our pure soul energy. So that Cancer rising over time has developed a lot of ideas and a lot of beliefs about yourself and life, right? So you may find that you feel you only have a lot of value when you're helping other people or nurturing other people or being a problem solver, right? You have a lot of Capricorn in the sixth. So Sun in Aquarius in the seventh is you may feel that you lack a certain amount of innovation. You may feel that you may feel very domestic in a sense, which, if I wanted to put it in terms, you may feel very basic. So you like to draw in people who are interesting and have different ideas. You like to sort of work off that dichotomy. You find that to be very interesting. You also like people to bring people in who also have a focus on humanity and society and other people in giving something. So that's something that you would have a harder time being with somebody that focuses a lot on themselves, because you have so much Leo in the first. So a lot of things are filtered through your own perspective. Um, and then the moon in Aries can be that you are a very energetic kid. You could have been very bossy as a kid. Very much a renegade, hard to pin down, very hard to tell you what to do, but super impressive with just anything that you wanted to try. I find Moon and Aries people to be innately talented. They just can be really talented at many and everything. They have a very can do attitude, and they're very decisive. Okay, so it's interesting having the Aries and then the Cancer rising, because you're sort of having to pull away from this. I need to be a leader, I need to control things. You know, I feel better if I've started something. You're having to move away from this Aries energy and sort of move towards this, build out this Cancer facade or exterior. This could also come from a childhood where, a mom or someone in your family told you, oh, you must always be nice. I see this a lot too. So point is of why I'm looking at all of this is because I'm trying to get a good sense of where we're coming from. So going into this year, so now you have the Aries on the ascendant. And so the moon was within the 12th. Okay. So you might have felt very emotionally tired, drained, exhausted this year. And the interesting thing is that as this chart progressed, the moon did, it would have overlaid into the first. So it might be a little bit better now than it was at the beginning of the year. Um, but definitely, I'm trying to think in context of COVID too. So putting on the Aries costume over the Cancer is sort of, um, the way I see this pairing is, like I need to put my big girl pants on and just like suck it up and do it. And this, a lot of this may have been because COVID really happened right around this time. It happened like a month after this. Um, So some of this isolation in the 12th could have been job displacement in and of itself. But you were probably fortunate in the job area just because you did have Jupiter up here close to the midheaven. Um, but Sun in the 11th. So this is really important. So this is where all of that focus of the year is being put into. So you had a lot of focus for Sun in Aquarius in the 11th. So Aquarius is the natural home for the 11th. So this deals a lot with working with groups, and this deals a lot with like nonprofit sector, or just finding community. And this is a community outside of like the third house region of community, which is like your neighborhood or local community. So when I think of like, especially lately, so with COVID, Sun in the 11th to me is like a community online. So like, or some kind of community that can't meet locally. Like maybe they used to meet locally, but they can't anymore. So a lot of your focus was contributing to some greater effort this year that was helping people other than yourself. And maybe the costume or the persona you put on, although it's being fueled by the Cancer rising, it's dressed as the Aries. So you were maybe not someone that necessarily was waiting to be called upon, but somebody that was just ready to get in there and do it. And with everything that happened this year, it probably did require you to be pretty decisive, and prepared for changes with the Uranus here in the first. So but yeah, the Venus, Neptune, and Pisces and Mercury probably gave you a boost of intuition and psychic abilities. That's another thing you might notice too if you go back through your previous solar returns. Because I mentioned natally, based on the natal chart alone, I saw some psychic, or some intuitive abilities, but not as much as others. So it might not be reliable. But on the years that you had planets in Pisces like this, because there are several years you would have had Mercury and Venus there, or one of the two. So if you go and look through those solar returns, see if you can find little connections of, wow, like yeah, that year I really went with this weird gut feeling all the time, and things ended up working out. So it'd be interesting for you to go through and look and see, if that would pan out as you thought it would. Um, so yeah, a lot of focus was placed on the fourth this year. This, to me, honestly, with the planets here in the 12th, the moon here in the fourth, south node on the midheaven, sun in the 11th, this could definitely mean job displacement in the sense of, not working at your traditional job location. So this could have been working from home. Moon in the fourth, and then like planets like Neptune and Venus in the 12th. This can also mean a concern or care for somebody who is ailing or ill. I see this quite often as well, um, with this type of position, especially when they're in water signs. So I'm curious if someone in your family fell sick, or um, somebody, you had to be extra cautious because there was someone in your family that was sick. And this doesn't necessarily have to be something that like you were a literal caretaker for them, although that does happen quite often with this type of aspect overlay. But it is possible that there was somebody, even if they were living elsewhere, whether it's a nursing home or across town or even another state, that could still be a great level of concern for the year. Um, so let me take a quick look. I want to go through anything else that sticks out. Like I said, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this year because I think you'll benefit more hearing next year. Because at this point, me talking about this year is kind of just talking about stuff that's already happened. So, okay. So sorry for having my camera off. I had to pause because I had to take my dog out and now she's on the couch and she's just crazy. So, um, anyway, yeah, so let's talk about Uranus in the first because this is pretty important. I experienced this in my own natal chart this year. So this is whether it was an actuality or something that actually happened. This is usually a sign of making a major change in your appearance or certain aspects of yourself. So this is a major self-improvement placement. So whenever I see this here, this is like when someone has this like sudden jolt of, I need to do this, or I need to focus on this. It's like a restlessness almost, where you just feel like the skin you've always been in is somehow like not servicing you. But luckily this would be, trine by sign to your natal. So it probably wasn't like super uncomfortable like it is for some people. But even when it's in a sign that, like for instance with me, with my natal, it was like right on my ascendant and it still felt uncomfortable. So but you also have sun in Aquarius and I don't have like any air in my chart. I'm a complete air void. So it may not feel as uncomfortable for you. But the Uranus can affect a lot of areas of life because of it being in the first, making major changes and possibly even taking some risks, right? Because like Uranus is a very like fast, big, expansive energy. It's very much onset. There's nothing gradual about Uranus whatsoever, other than its movement, which is like an omen sometimes. But not all changes are bad, right? Some changes are really good. With this in particular, because when looking at Uranus as far as like risk taking or the need to make major changes, often Saturn is kind of what roots us in place or holds us back, right? So if Saturn is not in like a great position to work with Uranus, then those big major changes or risks can um, really kind of bite us in the rear. So what's interesting is you may have been considering taking some calculated risks because both earth signs, you may have considered taking some calculated risks with your job, um, because the Saturn is here in Capricorn. It's fully in its home, right? So this also could be saying to me that like the job situation was fine. There was a lot of changes going on. Um, for the most part, even though the pandemic, that was something that was pretty secure. But the Uranus could be showing some restlessness of maybe you feel like this particular job or this particular career is no longer a good fit for you. The North Node moon in the fourth could be showing sort of like this going back to your roots and trying to, assess what type of career you would find joy from, right? Or like you would feel really comfortable or like you're motivated, just passionate about. So it's kind of interesting that these sort of the chart overlay is of um, the traditional houses. It makes it for a really interesting chart to look at. Um, so yeah, but overall, there's like a strong need for independence, and in a way it's good because this is one of your few fixed signs. So this was one place that you were almost immovable on, that you were going to make changes, or the desire to make changes was very strong and persistent. So if you avoided that and didn't want to take any calculated risks, that probably felt very uncomfortable. Um, but it also could show that this sun in the 11th, although you are wanting to make a lot of changes and be independent and focus on yourself, there was this call to put a lot of your energy into something bigger than yourself. And that also is quite the dichotomy there too. Um, but the point being, when you were able to, you were probably taking a lot of actions on your own, which is good. So Uranus was definitely sort of kicking this Aries rising here, this badass, maybe even like a girl boss type of vibe, or like I don't need anybody sort of vibe, or I'm a leader. It could be any of these things. It was sort of kicking that Aries into, is giving it a little bit of a boost. And then let's go to the moon again quick. So looking at the moon for this solar return year, was in the fourth. So, and it was in the same sign as your ascendant. So there again is this sort of focus on the self, right? Even though there's a focus on a bigger group, it's likely your placement or your position within this group or within this community or on social media. But when the moon is typically in the fourth, um, it shows that your domestic situation is very important. But it shows major changes within the home and your physical and emotional needs for shelter. Um, Again, this could be something minor. This could just be, and because it's only really getting a hit from Jupiter. These were probably minor things. These probably weren't, other than the possibility of some having to take care of someone, the actual physical home itself, I wouldn't say it's likely that you moved. But this often does happen for people who are going to move. But this can happen a lot for renovations too. Again, I'm sort of getting this intuitively. Like if you did have to start working from home, you likely had to make different arrangements to make the home office work for you. Um, so, and again, domestic needs usually affect career goals if you've got planets in the 10th. So I kind of went through all this. So let me move on to Mars. So with Mars and Sag, one thing to note is that um, Mars is sort of, so the sun is where your focus is, but Mars is sort of where your energy is. Um, so it's always useful if the Mars and the sun, even if they're not aspecting, if they're, harmonious, which they are. So there was probably some relevance to this sector of your life this year and the Mars. So Mars being in Sagittarius in the ninth, to me this is displaying that there's a big focus on your beliefs, but also like refining knowledge you've already attained. And Mars and Sag can be very quick, and it can expect results very quickly. There could be a high set of standards with Mars and Sagittarius. So if this call for like higher learning came from a job, like we do have a semi-sextile to Pluto, if this came for a job purpose, it could be that, there was an expectation for you to somehow improve some sort of knowledge set very quickly. Um, but it could also just mean that you're starting to be more outspoken about your beliefs, right? So some of this introspection, some of this intuition that you're getting here from the 12th could have manifested in a way where you felt the need to speak up a little bit more about what you believe in. You might have felt a lot more fiery this year too, just in general, even though you still only have two. The ascendant really does say a lot, and Mars is very, very comfortable in fire signs. But because it's in the ninth, it's not something that, likely you felt the need to, that took over a huge portion of your life, because it is in a cadent house, so it's not as visible. But there could have been concerns with travel too. So if for your job you did have a lot of travel, the Mars here can be some sort of frustration, right? Like the squares here from Venus to Neptune. It could be some sort of frustration because what may have been a rather structured schedule, or like, something that felt structured and comfortable to you, now kind of is losing some definition. Um, and there's a loss of that pleasure, or the loss of that maybe extra money that came from that. Um, but again, it usually is set around some sort of belief. A lot of times when Mars is in the ninth in a solar return, a lot of people can reassess their religious beliefs. Sometimes they'll go visit like a new church, or they'll just happen upon something that's like a new religious idea, and they might research that, or like try to experience that in a physical manner a little bit more. Um, so one thing that can sometimes you may have had to watch out for this year is the soapbox syndrome. Now, I in my natal chart have a stellium in the ninth, and I cannot tell you enough how much I suffer from soapbox syndrome. It is very, very bad. It is a problem. If they had an anonymous group for it, I would need to go. So experiencing that may have been a bit of a different feeling for this year as well, because you do have a lot of planets down here natally in the second quadrant. So you tend to be very, very introspective. So all these planets being up towards the top of the chart is probably been a lot to deal with. Um, but I think, yeah, so I touched on planets that I felt I needed to touch on a little bit more for this year. Again, if you really feel the need to go over a specific area for this year, we can go back. But I do want to get to the other solar return, or else we won't have time. So let me hop over to that one really fast. Okay, so this is exciting. Um, there's a lot going on here. So much Aquarius this upcoming year. And you have an ascendant return. Okay, so this is super important. Whenever you get an ascendant return in a solar return chart, this is a year of major transformation. This is a year for major life changes. This is a year where, those layers of depth and knowledge I was talking about with the natal ascendant, this is where they happen. So there are going to be events that happen this upcoming year that are going to change the way that you view the world and you present yourself to the world. Basically, it's a big like maturity year. Um, but what's really exciting is that I'm getting a lot of like love and romance out of this chart. And it's not just because it got planets stacked up in the seventh. I think that, some people are like, that's very beginner astrology. But what's interesting is, now I'll delve more into this in a little bit. But what is interesting is that we now have the North Node in the 11th. So you're actually innately more comfortable this year in the fifth house. And that seems to me, and the vertex is in the fifth too. So this is, and moon, all of that's right there. So this is a big indicator of meeting love or new love, or an aspect of a current relationship renewing, like, relationships how they go through seasons. So this could be a renewal of a relationship if you're in one already. And the North Node in the 11th is sort of calling you back to your North Node, if I remember correctly. Yes. So you have North Node in your natal as well. So it's almost like all that, all the effort from the sun in the 11th from this year is going to reward you with um, the South Node promise of your birth chart. So one thing that people get mixed up with when it comes to the nodes, people, you hear a lot of people say, oh, well, avoid the South Node and we should never want the South Node. And that kind of sucks because I have South Node in the fifth house too. So it's kind of sucky when you hear people say, oh, don't ever worry about expressing yourself and shining and standing out. And don't ever worry about, you know, enjoying a new romance for what it is, or enjoying sex just for the sake of enjoying sex, or, there's a lot of those implications of like, oh, you only need to focus on, it's almost like very martyrdom in the way some people explain it, where it's like, oh, you should only focus on um, blending within the group, and conforming within the group, and sharing your ideas with the world, and like you kind of get this like it comes off very pretentious, right? But what actually in fact happens is that these two are constantly springboarding from one to the other. So when you activate one very strongly and you do that work, you get the reward of the south node. So why people say this is that the south node should be used as a foundation. So the south node is there to remind you of like where you've come from, and what you can do is use the strength of the south node to help propel you to the north node. And then whenever you sort of touch this, you get to like immediately descend back down and receive the rewards from the south node. So it's kind of like if I were to put it in the simplest of terms that I can think of think of the North Node as like clocking in, right? So you clock in, let's say, 10 times, and then every 2 weeks you get that paycheck, like, so think of it as clock in and payday. Um, so again, you want to focus on North Node more, but you'll get big rewards from the South Node. So when I'm looking here and I'm seeing that you're not only having an ascendant return, you're having a lunar return, solar return, lunar return, and you're having a nodal return too. So this is a huge, huge year for transformation. So if you've been sitting here wondering, like, I've been trying to be responsible. I've been through my Saturn return. I've been trying to do my North Node work. When is this like, when am I going to start to reap some of the rewards as far as, home and a solid relationship and solid friendships and a solid community and a solid job that I love, right? And these things are sort of always evolving, but the fact of the matter is, whenever I see a return like this, I know it's a huge year happening. Um, so I don't think I need to go into the Cancer that much. You're very much going to be yourself this year, and it may be a more reserved form of yourself because for some reason you're working on some of this. Um, and to be honest, sometimes the ascendant return years are the best years to find a relationship or to really connect with your partner again on a relationship level, because you're not dressing up in a costume of somebody else, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's um being fully yourself. I mean, there's pros and cons, but the pro is that people can really see you for who you are. So we've got that cardinal water on the rising. You have a lot of fixed energy this year. So you're working to create a lot of foundation. You're working to be really resourceful. And this could be because coming off the pandemic, you're just like, nah, dude, I'm not cool with all these changes. I'm not cool with having to constantly initiate all these things. Like, I know I'm good at it, but I really just want to break this year because the cardinal is at 1. So it's gonna feel pretty uncomfortable. And uncomfortable is not always a bad thing when I say it that way. It just means it's very out of your comfort zone. But you do still have a lot of fix. You're not getting like low cardinal, low fix, and a ton of mutable. That would really suck. Um, but it is a lot of fixed energy, and it's a lot of air energy. So again, this year is really different because yeah, you still got some earth, but low water, which you typically have a lot of water, and low fire. So this is more of a year for standing still, of tending to the pasture you have, and air is really sort of building out through these connections and experiences with other people. Um, and we do have some stuff here in the eighth too. So there's a lot more intimacy this year. So typically you're already a pretty introspective person with a lot of planets here in the second quadrant. And this year, a lot of those planets being in the fourth quadrant, again, not super duper comfortable for you. You prefer to be here, or you prefer any of these to the fourth. So, but having you do have, especially Moon in the back in the second, um feels pretty comfortable to you. But, a lot of these planets here in the third, you're extending out just a little bit outside your comfort zone without feeling completely at a loss. Um, Nothing is truly hitting your Chiron in this chart. I forgot to check here. Yeah, nothing was really hitting there either. Um, so let's so yeah, we've got air here. So definitely you're trying to be more rational. You may debate more or just take more of an interest in other people, right? And you might make a lot of concentrated efforts towards people. But Venus conjunct Saturn, oh, I'm really curious if there's a possibility for marriage or a possibility for if you own your own business, like a business partnership, like something that is really gonna really put down a lot of foundation for you, and it's usually this union with other people. It's very interesting. Let's see, so we talked about that. I don't see anything out of declination whatsoever. um let's see, sun and moon. So yeah, your moon is pretty comfortable this year because natally, it does have those two squares, which do help, but um, the problem with Venus and Jupiter is they kind of do things in their own time. They don't, they like to help, but they don't have that call to help the way Mercury or Moon does, right? So your Moon in Aries is like, come on, but you're getting just this nice sextile this year from Venus. So it's just, this is going to be, for the most part, a comfortable year. The hardest aspect of this year is going to be job and workplace and status. That's going to be the most difficult thing. Also, these changes, you're going to have a lot of changes to your status out in the world and society. Um, and because this is all in the Taurus sector of things, a lot of this could be surrounded by finances. So we'll get into that a little bit as far as what all that can mean, because you are getting a lot of squares here. But all these conjunctions, all in the same sign. Sun in the eighth can feel uncomfortable, but it's very close to the seventh. So I kind of count it as both. But moon being comfortable makes a huge difference, goes a long way, especially because it's in its own um its ascendant is ruling the chart. So the moon is ruling the solar return this year, whereas Mars was ruling the solar return this year. So the Mars in Sagittarius was very important. Um, this sort of need to speak on your beliefs or need to act upon your beliefs, reassess what they are, or act upon this need to gain more knowledge. So this year it's like this need to nurture and create, a home, or create some sort of home base, or find, if it's not your current family, building upon a family you call your own, and finding a lot of expression and pleasure and fun, especially moon and Sag. My daughter is a moon and Sag, and she is like the most fun, vibrant, optimistic person I've ever met in my life. And so moon and Sag is really, people knock it, but it's a very nice placement. So you should feel quite comfortable there, especially because it does trine your natal moon. So, okay, so we talked about Cancer rising. Let's go a little bit more into moon, and then we're going to get into this huge seventh, and then we'll get into this 10th house, and then I think that will wrap it up. Okay, so moon in the fifth, in Sagittarius. So this usually indicates sort of some sort of birth. Okay, so when we think of moon, we think of mother, the cycle of full to new, and we also think of this sort of in Sagittarius, we think of this like adventure sort of aspect there. So, or journey. So usually the moon is sort of the first light of this new beginning or this new cycle, and it being in Sagittarius is showing this sort of expression of that first. um so when that first typically happens, the fifth house is the house of romance. So a lot of people sort of get it confused because they're like, oh, the seventh house is so romantic. The seventh house isn't really all that romantic, quite honestly. It's an air sign. It's in Libra, which Libra is Venus and romance, but it's more about harmony, whereas like the fifth house is more about romance. So the dynamics are greater in the fifth. You think of the fifth house as like the fireworks, or the first time you're intimate with someone. And honestly, moon in the fifth often indicates that. Like if you've been dating somebody and you haven't been intimate, the moon in the fifth could indicate, oh, that we're going to be intimate this year. Um, let's see. But often, especially with people around our age, this is usually when you'll meet the person you're going to marry. This very often happens. In fact, I had this same layout what the year I met my husband. So, and it was in a fire sign as well. Um, it also can be if you've been in a relationship with somebody, this could be you guys moving in together. And we did have moon in the fourth last year. So this could have been the talks of you guys moving in together. And then this year could be it actually happening. Um, but you will usually make an emotional connection with a new person. So even if it's not romantic, if you're already married and you've got a strong marriage, um, it could be a strong attraction that is platonic in nature, because Sagittarius can definitely lend itself to that as well. Someone that just makes you feel more passionate, more alive, more vibrant. Um, but yeah, it's not necessarily associated with sexual attraction, but there is an element of romance usually associated. Um, and there's a strong emotional supply that's being delivered when the moon is in the fifth. So there's usually an increase of intimacy. Um, Feelings are also super super intense with moon in the fifth. And what's interesting is that the 1 degree of Sagittarius, it makes me wonder if these are feelings you haven't experienced before. Because if the moon were, because one, I think as a baseline, you don't have a ton of Sag. I mean, you guys, yeah, South Node. Oh, interesting, South Node. I forgot about that. This could be a fated relationship. So if you've been wondering, and I know I keep going back to love, but a lot of my clients want to know about love. So if you have been at the point where you're like, maybe you got out of a long-term relationship and you're like, I feel like I wasted all this time, or if you've just, no one's been able to match up and you're just like, where is he? It could be that it was, and oftentimes in astrology, this is just how it is, you're fated to meet that person at a particular time. So because while we do have free will, there are promises in our chart. And so a lot of times your marital partner is somebody promised to you. Um, let's see. Um, One thing that you'll need to be aware of is that moon in the fifth, a lot of your emotions are expressed for better or worse. So this is definitely going to be somewhat of a challenge because you do have sun in the eighth. So you'll want to be very private, but that moon in the fifth is going to want to be very expressive. So that is something to keep in mind. Um, you will just be more expressive than usual. So, typically with your chart, you have the Cancer rising, but you have moon in Aries in the ninth. So you may only be expressive when in a debate where you feel like you can truly express what you believe, or it has purpose or relevancy, where Sagittarius doesn't care as much about if something's relevant or not. So and it's in the fifth of the traditional house of Leo, so it's just much more like, well, if I feel like I want to say it, or if I feel I need to express myself, I'm going to do it. So it's going from a cadent house to a succeeding house, so it is more expressive. So I wanted to point that out. This can also mean that you find a lot of happiness from some sort of creative outlet with the moon in the fifth. Oftentimes with Sagittarius, this could be like, you know, role play or theater, or, acting in a position that's new where you get a little bit of creative expression there. But it could also be something where, and I always have to try to, not apply this as like, you're magically going to become a painter this year. It's not that, but like you could find a lot more peace in like coloring this year. For instance, when I recently had Moon in the fifth for a solar return, I took up color by numbers a lot because it was just so freaking relaxing for me. And it's not something I'm consistent with, but for some reason, this this particular year, I did it consistently all the time because it was a way for me to soothe myself. But let's get into some of these more like these really, really interesting placements here in the seventh. That's probably okay. So Pluto here, it's literally 1 minute from the seventh. So, and it's in a cardinal sign. So I will quickly go over the associations with the sixth house. So the sixth house, when we're dealing with Pluto, a lot of Pluto in a solar return chart talks about our compulsions, but it also talks about power dynamics. So the sixth house is the house of health and the house of work, daily work. So Pluto here can be sort of addressing a need to change and transform some compulsions that are present within the sixth house. So, if you are, this happens a lot for people who want to start a new health regimen, especially because it's in a cardinal sign. So I'm speaking specifically to this. Um, but it can also be the start of kicking a habit. So it can be usually when it's at a cardinal sign, you're wanting to specifically replace it. You're specifically wanting to kick the habit because you want to replace it with something better. Whereas some people just want to kick a habit because they know they should. So this could be something about your routine. This could be just exercise. You may know that like you may have noticed a compulsion of like Venus is pretty close to it, so like maybe craving a lot of sweets, right? So the Pluto here could be that whether you consciously or subconsciously realize it, you're noticing that this is a existing issue that you're wanting to change the dynamic of. Now, when it comes to work, oftentimes Pluto pulls a lot of focus, whether it's conscious or subconscious. So the Pluto in the sixth could be indicating that Pluto was in the 10th in 2020. So you did a lot of focus on the career, a lot of focus on career path. And so now with the work, that Pluto may be spilling over a little bit to where you may, in some aspect, feel the need to be a workaholic because you may feel like if you don't, that your position is in jeopardy somehow. So you may find yourself really concerned about power dynamics, about being micromanaged. So that may make you feel uncomfortable. And so you'll need to find a balance for that. But for the most part, with Pluto, we're going to be looking at the seventh house. So Pluto in the seventh house is always, always, always going to deal with power dynamics. And so to me, this is a positive placement because one, it's not getting it's not technically well, actually technically it is unaspected. Sorry, I just want to look really quick just to make sure. Yeah, I mean it's opposition to the ascendant, but it is saying it's conjunct to Venus, but that is a super wide conjunction. I wouldn't even count that. So it is kind of unaspected, but because it's right on the angle, I'm counting it as aspect conjuncting the descendant. But Pluto isn't getting hit by a lot of other things. So really, Pluto here on the descendant is merely a statement of there's a major transformation of a power dynamic in a intimate relationship. And so your intimate relationships of the seventh can be of three categories. They can be of platonic, non-romantic relationships, such as your very, 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 very close friends or business partnerships, or just some sort of associates of some sort. This can also be romantic relationships um, where there's some sort of established like union of some sort. So usually this is, if you're Facebook official or Instagram official, or whatever it is that whatever it is that you use currently. You're older than me, so you're probably still a Facebook person, although I don't know, maybe I'm just an old soul and I just don't care to use anything else. Um, um, so yes, and then also there's like your soulmate connections. So I feel this is a soulmate connection based on what I was saying about the moon and the nodes, the fact that you have an ascendant return, and the fact that you have a hugely packed seventh house with like literally all the planets needed to indicate marriage. Venus in a seventh house soul return is usually without a doubt the beginning of a strong long-term relationship. Saturn there is just, lending itself to saying that this is a relationship that comes with responsibility. That's typically a marital partnership, although that could be business partnership. The Venus could be indicating money. The Jupiter though is expanding. It's very expansive, and then the Sun there too. So if you had had a stronger seventh house natally, it would be harder for me to delineate whether this is a romantic or a business partnership. But because your seventh house is empty in natally, for your lifetime, your lessons in life, marriage and your marital partner aren't a huge factor for you. So you may be somebody that isn't all that like, maybe only now you've cared about marriage. Maybe it's just like, as time's gone on, you're like, well, I don't know, is this something I I don't need it, but it'd be nice to have. That could very well be um the essence of your chart, as far as maybe you've been unsure about marriage in general. Um, but having all of these planets in the seventh, 90, 92% of the time, it's a marriage chart, or an engagement chart. So, um, yeah, so Jupiter is just expanding upon the presence of this power dynamic in your life. And again, it's sort of also showing, based on your natal chart, that your chart has promised your descendant of Capricorn and your sun in Aquarius, you wanting to draw in an Aquarius partner, and you've got packed Aquarius house. So this to me is just saying like this person has come, this person you've been looking for. So again, if it's not love, then it's that perfect intimate close friend or that perfect business associate, um, that is going to deliver more than expected in that area. Um, but of course, with the Mars in Taurus, right? And it's squaring the sun. And I'm thinking about your sun in your own, natal. And actually, I think, yeah, it was in your natal seventh, right? Just yes. Okay, it's 2 degrees from the eighth. Just making sure. Um, that Mars squaring, and that Mars is not well placed, by the way. That Mars is in fall. So I don't know if you know all the dignities, but like for instance, your sun technically is in fall as well, but for the sun, I mean, who cares, right? It's just showing that like you have a little bit harder time shining, and your sun being in the seventh is kind of like, I typically shine when I'm with other people, and that's cool, like that may, you just feel like maybe more of your true self comes out when you're with those that you're really close with. Um, oh, I'm speaking out of turn. You don't have an empty seventh. I don't know what I was saying. I'm totally off kilter today. I think it's the full moon energy happening right now. It's on my first house, and it's just making me feel blech. But yes, so marriage is important to you, but it's something you've had to build up to. That's basically what I was trying to say. You may have been unsure about marriage with the South Node in the fifth, and a lot of this stuff in the sixth, in the fourth house, Saturn. It can create a lot of doubts, right? A lot of doubts about marriage and a lot of fears about marriage. But yes, marriage has been something that partnership and union is something very important to you. So the sun returning here, I mean, honestly, it's just like fate happening. It's like the wheel of fortune just turning. So this Mars being in fall this could be somebody who's been in a long-term relationship or married before, or if it's a business partner, it may be someone who was in another startup business before, because the Mars in Taurus in the 10th is showing me that there's some kind of like baggage, right? Some kind of baggage being brought to this. So while within the sector of the 7th and 8th, everything's going well, like everything is just like happening as it should, there are external influences that will affect this relationship. There are external changes that will affect this relationship that are unexpected changes. And I do believe a lot of this is going to happen around work or money. Some of the power dynamic of the six could be, well, what do I want to do about my job? It could be that this partner, you guys are, and it's fixed, right? So there could be long debates or long talks about what the role should be in the relationship, who should be responsible for what. Um, are we sure we understand each other's beliefs with Neptune and Pisces, right? Now, this could just be a soul connection, between the two of you, but it could be that, like, belief wise, you focused on it so much this year that now going into 2021, it's almost like you're losing a little bit of that. And sorry, puppy crying. And that could be because now you're merging with someone else. Before, this year you were having a lot more privacy, you were at home a lot more, you were focused on making a lot of changes for yourself. Yes, you had a lot of stuff in the 10th, but you had a lot of stuff happening here in the 11th as well. So you had more like group community. So it's different when you gain inspiration and beliefs through a group and then with a partner, right? So you might intuitively try to feel things out as far as your beliefs, but you may feel more spiritual this year as well. Okay, so let me go ahead and wrap this up. So basically, as I was saying, the Mars Uranus to me definitely seems to be one, the sort of challenging of dynamics again. But it's also about, your values and worst, like values and worst coming together between you and this union or multiple unions that could happen this year. Some of your value sets you might not fully agree on. And a lot of these are going to be in the context of money and work and roles. That's a lot of what this is going to be. So a lot of this year is focusing on union, new love, new romance, or just new passions, new sparks of creativity, and this sort of merging things that are very fixed in nature, right? Because these are both fixed signs, Taurus and Aquarius. So both of you have different ideas. You and these people have different ideas. So it can be hard to, come together and agree. Now, you typically have a lot of earth energy. Yeah, and you have a lack of air. So it may be that, you know, it you're doing what you can to be objective, but because even the Mercury's there trying to be objective, but it's retrograde at this time. So it's going to be hard for you to fully meet this person where they are, but they also have to understand they have to meet you where you are. But the main reason I think this is mostly money and external like factors coming into play, like people inserting themselves in the relationship, is because that part of fortune right there. The part of fortune to me is meaning money of some sort. Also, the sun in the 8th could mean that this person is actually quite well off. So that's something to feel positive about too. But the square from Mars in the 10th could be that if he is well off, a lot of those expenses might have to go to something else. So this could be child support. This could be, I forgot to turn my camera back on. I'm sorry. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. I meant to turn that back on a while ago. I am literally all over the place today. So I feel badly and I'm running over, and this whole reading is a mess, but to refilm the whole thing would be utterly exhausting. So, but yeah, so that money that he has, those resources, which would now become your resources, and also forgive me for using the pronoun he. I'm just throwing out what my mind comes up with. It could be that that money gets funneled elsewhere. So again, if this is a business, associate, they could have a lot of baggage and still be paying fees towards a previous business, or they're still attached to a previous business. So got to be careful about that. But a lot of this will be about being the union, identifying who you are within the relationship, but then also what you're willing to share and not share. How are you a couple and how are you individuals? So that's a lot of what I see here. Like 2021 is pretty straightforward. 2020 was a little, because you had moon down here and it was a little different. But 2021 is, the story seems much more congruent. So, yeah, really quick, I'll just throw this on top of 2021 on top of your natal. And I literally do this just super fast. Okay, so Pluto did go over your Venus some time ago. I would assume that you had a major relationship back then, and likely you ended things, or if they ended things, you in a way were okay with this because it changed what you want in a relationship anyways, like how you choose to love and how you want someone to love you. So now the Pluto is going over this Mercury, and your progressed Mercury, which we won't get into all that, is in Aquarius by now. So that Pluto could be challenging you and this air void that you have, this need to be more objective. It's also going to challenge how you feel you are placed in a workplace, and also what you say and how it matters within relationships. So Pluto on this Mercury is going to push a lot of that this year. It's so interesting. Look, even the natal Venus is like right there in the 7th overlay as well. Now we do know that the sun is different. It's in the 8th for this upcoming year instead of the 7th. So you do have Neptune coming in. And what's interesting, Neptune coming in on true Black Moon Lilith is maybe this spark of spirituality comes from this exploring your own feminine nature. And that kind of happens a lot in relationships, right? Lilith can get activated in some way. So this is just another connotation that I'm seeing here, which technically, yes, last year's solar return and the year before that would have had it, but it's separating now. So I still do see it as something to note. Again, we had the nodal returns. The Mars Uranus is in the 10th, in the solar return as well as in the natal. So again, a lot of focus on work and status in the world. And, a lot of times I see prominent 10th house placements once people get married because your name changes, like things like that, like important things change. Like even legally, there's just a ton that comes with that. Moon close to South Node, it's not quite conjunct. But yeah, a lot of that stuff's happening. 6th, 7th, 8th. But yeah, the Mercury's in the 8th as well. Being more introspective, understanding how to be more objective again, because you do have the Mercury in Capricorn in the 6th. You may sometimes self-sabotage yourself with that tongue, like speaking too quickly, or maybe because it's in the 6th, the traditional house of Virgo, feeling the need to point out things wrong within a system at work, or pointing out, critiquing someone's work or the way they're living their life. That might be something that you almost sabotage yourself in some way with relationships. So that Mercury falling into the 8th could be a way of you sort of reassessing that. I don't get that impression hugely though with the Mercury. I just wanted to note that. I don't want you to feel like I see you as that person. I'm just saying this particular way of the planet sitting is definitely it's common that could happen. But yeah, I think that is the
It.
gist of it.
So
I am so sorry for all the interruptions. I'm so sorry for me not having a train of thought in the world. That is a symptom of my Mercury in Sagittarius. Please don't take it personally. I usually do my best to try to be professional at least. I do have a lot of Capricorn in my chart, but that mutable energy is a killer. So you know, I envy people who have low mutable. So anyway, that is pretty much it. So thanks, Bella. Let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. I'm more than happy to answer them, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.